Hello, everyone. My name is Josiah Blackwell-Lipkind. I'm a student at Georgetown's Urban Planning Program. I'm also a planner for USDOT Volpe Center. I actually work on reconnecting communities and neighborhoods, the grant program that you were talking about. I'd be happy to talk a bit more. But today I'm not talking about federal level, I'm talking about something very local, which I'm calling the K Street Bike Lane Project Analysis. Essentially, I'm presenting an analysis of a bike lane project that serves. Better? Logistically. Thank you. Basically, I'm using the K Street Bike Lane Project as a natural experiment to understand how. So this quote is from a text that actually handed Joe used in one of his classes. Essentially, we are building stuff, and then we're not really studying what the impacts are. So we need to do more retrospective analyses of the projects that we're implementing, especially looking at before and after, doing before and after analysis, which is what I did here. Sorry, sound. So this is the study area. In light gray is actually a project area that for Georgetown, we identified downtown east neighborhood, which is where Georgetown's capital campus is going to be co-equal in size to the Hilltop campus. So that's there in the middle. On the left we have Capital One Arena, and on the right is Union Station. So we're kind of like in the heart of the city, and then the K Street area that I'm looking at is right there in red. So running from the Carnegie Library or the Apple Store to kind of around Union Station area. And then, I'd be remiss to not talk about the history of the area, which was heavily impacted by urban renewal, slum clearance, and the construction of the I-395 interstate leg. So the area was largely decimated. As you can see here, 1949 to 2005, we went from this kind of like bustling, dense urban area to a lot of parking. And then K Street currently provides one of the only east-west links across this highway. So what is the project? So in 2021, DC DDOT implemented this thing called the Separated Bike Lane Preliminary Design, but this was the preliminary design they implemented the project. It reallocated street space to active transportation, essentially. So they removed on-street parking and some travel lanes and replaced it with protected bike lanes. Here, so I have the dates. So the top is 2019 and the bottom is 2021. Same spot, you can see the pedestrian sign. So we went from, on-street parking on both sides to travel into the turn lane to very limited on-street parking and protected bike lanes. And then farther down, this is the bridge over the 395 highway. We went from 4 lanes in 2020 to 2 lanes with protected bike lanes in 2022. So, what can we ask about this? We can ask a lot of things. There are 3 main questions that I asked. The first is about travel. So, a common fear with these kinds of projects, road diets, if you will, is that they will impact vehicle travel. Businesses are going to be affected. There are all these fears. But what is actually happening on the ground? Are there any grounds to this fear? So, how did the project change the number and share of trips made by different modes? How did it impact safety? We hear about those benefits. Is that actually occurring on the ground? And then how are these kinds of road diet projects impacting businesses? Quickly, data. So I used replica data for most of this, minus crash data, which came from DC, Open Data DC. And Georgetown has licensed replica data to us, which is very exciting. It's entirely new data. And at a very high level, replica data is a new travel demand modeling data source with a fair amount of promise, which essentially takes GPS ping points from people's phones, so a sample of real world travel behavior, and then it scales it up using census data to create a synthetic population with then models. And they do this for Thursdays and Saturdays twice a year. They've been doing it since 2019. They skipped 2020 for obvious reasons. And because it's so new, practitioners are still kind of figuring out how it can be used. But this offers a unique opportunity to kind of test out what that might look like, what a use case might be. So trips by mode are provided by Replica, and business sales are also available through Replica credit card transactions. And then, forget someone earlier did mentioned difference in differences analysis. The diagram is funky, but sorry about that. Basically, when you're doing these before and after analyses, you want to control for confounding factors, especially COVID in this case, because before was 2019, after was 2022, so we had this kind of like huge shock that happened. So we want to make sure that that's impacting the data. And a difference in difference approach is useful because the controls and the treatment are both experiencing the same trends. So any difference beyond, what is naturally occurring between them can be attributed to treatment. So that is essentially at a very high level, the approach that I used. It's kind of important here to mention that with difference in difference, you need or you would like to have parallel trends in the before period. So you want to say that in the absence of the treatment, both groups would experience the same kind of effects. Unfortunately, there's only 1 year of data from Replica in the before period because, again, it's very new, so that limits our ability to check parallel trends. Although I'll show you in the next slide, these are the groups that I assigned, and it's relatively fair to say that they probably would have experienced similar trends. So that's an assumption being made. Okay, then quickly about the groups. So there are 2 treatment groups. In orange, in the very middle, kind of hard to see, is the case street itself, and then the indirect treatment in red is a half-mile buffer, capture spillover effects, and then the controls are everything in blue within 2 miles of the project. And I'll skip over, but there are 2 control groups. One is all the roads, and then another is a subset that I selected. Very quickly, too, the data, Replica data is kind of messy. So we had to develop an R script to consolidate data to single line features. But we did a similar thing with crash data. We had to basically assign crash data to single line features to simplify the analysis. Very complicated. Replica data has data for both directions of the road and sidewalks. We had to kind of collapse everything. And then, we assigned the data a group, treatment, or control, and then before and after. Okay, and then results quickly. So on the right, basically what these charts show is what the data is in the before period and what the data is in the after period for the 2 treatment groups and the controls. And in this case, what's shown is that the bike share jumped dramatically in the direct treatment group, much more than the controls, and something similar happened in the indirect treatment group, but to a lesser extent. So there's significant increase in bike trips and bike share. I'm not showing it here, but I have a whole tableau with the results if you want to look. But there was a slight decline in walk share, perhaps due to substitution, and then there was very limited impacts on vehicle travel. So fear about car travel being impacted did not really hold any true or limited. Safety, pretty dramatic results. The rate of trip crashes per trip fell for all modes. I'm showing bikes here by a substantial amount. So safety improved. And then economic impacts are also positive. So essentially, here we have the treatment in gray, and then there's a K Street average and a DC monthly average. I had to use two census tracts, which I'm using as proxies that cover most of K Street, not all of it, and kind of around it. Decent, I think, proxy. They follow very similar trends in the before period, and then they diverge significantly. K Street sees this kind of explosion in economic activity. DC economic activity has still not hit pre-pandemic levels. Well, what can we say? There are pretty significant benefits for travel by bicycle and economic activity. Seems to have had a positive effect on safety, and it did not dramatically affect travel by ambulance. Kind of what I wanted to see. Yeah. And then there was clearly a lot that you could do. So, I mean, this is like a very early analysis of replica data. There's a lot more that you could do with it. The methodology here was, I was kind of working from nothing. So there's definitely room for improvement. You might incorporate public transit, did not do that. You probably could revise the consolidation scripts that I talked about earlier, because there were some issues that probably captured 90%, maybe did 90% of the job, but not 100%. You could check parallel trends. You could fuse other data sources. And then if I have time, maybe I can do this. But basically, if you're sorry, the mic is annoying. If you're interested, you can go to this website. Really tiny. But so there's an introduction, and you can play with the data. You can see that these are the selected controls. You can see all the controls. You can turn things on and off. And then there's an overview slide, which shows you kind of overall results with the two different control groups. And then you can look at all the data. So this is the data for automobiles. For both, you have share and trips, and then crash data. You have the same for bikes. Again, you can see like the dramatic differences in trends and walking trips. And spend data is also here. No, it's through Tableau. So it's like an online tool, but it's public. So anyone could go look at this. I think you can should be able to download the data. There's also a GitHub. Right, anyway.
Last but not least, we have Jess also from the Urban Planning Program, presenting on downtowns in the US.
Thank you. So, thank you everybody who is still here. I know I'm last, and I appreciate you still being here. So hi, my name is Jess Eliot Myhre, and I did this research with John Stover and Associates. They're an economic development consulting firm here in Washington, DC. And this project focuses on America's downtowns and analyzes residential population growth since the pandemic. Last October, the Center City Bid released a report called Downtowns Rebound. In it, they acknowledge the impact that the pandemic and remote work has had on cities, but their report expresses optimism that cities' downtowns will indeed come back. One of the main points that the report makes is that although there are still fewer workers and visitors, residential populations in downtown areas have actually grown since 2020. The Center City bid says that 24 out of the 25 cities in their study regained residents to pre-pandemic levels and then exceeded them. So this report is coming out in the context of there being a major national conversation about the decline of cities because of the pandemic, because of remote work. And there have been really dramatic predictions of like the death of downtowns and urban doom loops, or as Neem, you were talking about the transit death spiral. And this is in media and academic literature, and it's not at all unfounded. So this claim that residential populations have actually been growing, if true, strikes me as having really, really big implications for the planning field. So with that, we set out to explore the data on our own. Here's the main research question. Have the residential populations of US downtowns rebounded from the pandemic? These are the 21 cities that we have included so far in our study. This project is not finished. They're chosen based on size, geographical spread throughout the country, cultural importance. But yeah, this is an ongoing project, so we're going to be adding more, and I would love to hear your suggestions. Yes. So data and its limitations are an incredibly important and sticky part of the story for this project. It was very difficult to choose the most appropriate data sources for this analysis. All of these have severe limitations, and this is actually why there are so many conflicting narratives about what is happening in cities right now. So for this project, we relied on the US Census's American Community Survey 1-year estimates and 5-year estimates. And although the 5-year time horizon is problematic if you're trying to study pre and post-pandemic situations, because it hasn't been 5 years yet, it was necessary to choose a data set that was available at a small enough and granular enough geographical level. We needed it at the census tract. And we also needed one that stayed methodologically consistent through the years. So this was the best choice. Another heavy methodological lift was, what's a downtown, and how do you define it? So what I settled on was taking the CBD, the Central Business District, as defined by Google Maps, because they actually have a really wonderful, rigorous, consistent methodology. And then I also wanted to take the census tracts around it if they were walkable or accessible to that CBD. So by that, I mean, I took the center point of all of those adjacent census tracts. And if the center point was half a mile from the CBD, I could include it as long as there wasn't some major barrier like a river or an interstate highway. But the defining downtown process did not happen very neatly and cleanly, though. Census tract geographies change with every decennial census, as I discovered as a part of this project. And they did so in 2020. So this results in different geographies from different years that you're trying to compare data from. And these geographies need to be reconciled. So here's the city of Denver as an example. The first picture is very close to what the boundaries are of the CBD. And the second picture represents the ideal greater downtown geography. But picture 3, these are the census tracts from 2019, and they don't align. But in order to compare the population growth, you have to have the geographies be the same. So one is faced with a decision. See pictures 4 and 5. Should you be more inclusive and expand your geography as you reconcile, or should you be more restrictive and shrink as you reconcile? Because this project is still underway, I'm just working with 2 different versions of downtown. Downtown 1, which shrinks, or no, downtown 1, which expands, and downtown 2, which shrinks. So let's hop into our findings. We're going to start big and then narrow it down so we can get appropriate context. Here is data from ACS 1-year estimates and 5-year estimates at the national, MSA, or metro region and citywide level. Let's pull out some trends. First, rural areas are growing at a much higher rate than urban areas, and this was true even before the pandemic. Second, metro regions are growing at a faster clip than the national average, and urban areas generally, although notice that their growth rate did slow after the onset of the pandemic. Third, cities were growing before 2020, and then they declined pretty sharply with the onset of the pandemic. Their growth rates went into the negative, and so on average, cities are shrinking. This can be read as people heading to the woods, to the suburbs, to smaller cities and towns. And lastly, this point is about the data itself and its limitations. Note how the 5-year estimates, they do also demonstrate the rough trends that we talked about. The MSA and the city growth rates being higher than the national average before the pandemic, and then slowing notably after the onset of the pandemic. Yet this trend is muted in the 5-year estimates because it's based on data that's collected over a 5-year time period. And so the trends aren't fully captured, and both the positive and negative spikes, they're smoothed or reduced. And so this has to be kept in mind as we move forward into findings about the downtown areas, which are fully reliant on the 5-year estimates because of their geography. So what's happening downtown? On average, downtowns are growing at a much faster rate than both cities and metro regions. And this is particularly true for the more geographically restrictive definition of downtown, the downtown 2. They're the fastest growing geography in the country. And let's look at some more correlations. One correlation I found is that downtowns that are smaller, and by that I'm not talking about geography, I'm talking about population. Smaller downtowns are growing faster than larger downtowns. So here's the city of Tampa, one of the smallest downtowns in our study. Notice the difference in population density change with that of Washington, D.C., which is one of the largest downtowns. So on average, the smaller half of the downtowns in our study group have about double the rate of growth as the larger half. So this means that people are moving to and they're staying in smaller downtowns. Another correlation, and this is even more significant, is that there's major variations in downtown growth or decline by region of the country. The South and the West have booming downtowns, while the coasts are experiencing stagnation and even possibly decline. So here's the change in population density for San Francisco on the West Coast compared to Oklahoma City, whose downtown has grown by almost 10%. These are the averages for our study cities by region. Remember that the national average for just general growth in the country is 2%. So East Coast downtowns are not doing so hot. But Midwest downtowns are growing at double the national rate, and the downtowns of the cities in the West and the South, they are eclipsing the national growth average at 5 to 8 times the rate. Let's compare this to cities and MSAs or metro regions by region as well. Again, our cities are faring poorly, and this is not a surprise to us. Yet across all regions, the downtowns are doing significantly better than cities as a whole. This means that by and large, it's the non-downtown areas that are losing the residential population. So our exciting hypothesis holds mostly true with some exception for the East Coast or like northern cities. And our numbers are much less glorious than that of the center city bid, but they still hold water. So what? This study helps show that even with the new fear of a major respiratory virus and pandemic, people still want to live not in cities, but in the densest part of cities. They want to live downtown, and downtowns are the fastest growing geography in the country. And it's not just true for really big cities, and it's not just for coasts. Inland America is actually the hero of the story today. It's southern towns and western downtowns that are the real stars. And it's places with the smaller downtowns that are really booming. For the cities that are declining on average, it's the non-downtown portions of those cities that are losing the most residential population. So this study, even though it's still underway and they're just initial findings, it really helps make the case for density, for transit-oriented development, for urbanism in general. People want to be downtown where there's transit, where there's amenities, even with the threats that the global pandemic can bring. Thanks.
Robin King had to leave, but being Robin King, she couldn't leave without leaving behind 2 questions. So Josiah, very interesting work. What can Replica do to make its data even better and more meaningful? And Jess, congratulations on this research. What is the implications of this on city budget?
Yeah, what can Replica do? Lot. I just wish that you could consolidate data, like that they had single line features. So I wish I could pull up what it looks like, but the data essentially is they have all alleys and sidewalks separated out by direction. Roads are 2 lanes going in each direction. So if you are interested in, like, say at K Street, for example, you have the number of trips going east, the number of trips going west on the road. And then you have the number of trips going east and west on the sidewalk. Yes, separated, all separate. So you have basically 4 pieces of data. And if you're interested in trips overall on the road, that's not useful to you. You basically need to collapse it into 1 piece of data for the road on its own, which is what I had to do in a script. The other thing about the data is some segments will, especially sidewalk, will not just be split directionally, but they'll split in 2 directions. So it'll be like a corner, which is not useful either, because then it's like, well, are they walking on the north-south street or are they walking on the east-west street? Maybe they're walking. That's one. It's very complicated because you also go into issues where if you have 2 segments of road, you can't just add up the trips on both, because the same person might be traveling first on the first segment and then on the second. So then you're double counting. So you have to take the average as a proxy for actual travel. It's very cool. I didn't mention earlier, but household travel surveys, which run models, which we update yearly based on new demographics. I think surveys are conducted every like 7 years. Which then at year 6, we're using data from 6 years ago. Not really the best case scenarios. So using a synthetic population and scaling it up, and this probably has its own limitations, but it's at least being updated twice a year. So you get very live data.
Thank you for the question about city budgets. I don't know a ton about fiscal policy and how a lot of that works, but I do know there's a lot in the national conversation about how remote work in the pandemic and office workers not coming back in this is having a really big impact on city budgets. And there's sort of like this lag fiscally, and there's a lot of fear around that. I think what I could speak to in terms of my own knowledge is that I think my research points to, if cities are wanting to attract more residents to come to their city, there's knowledge here that people are wanting to live in the dense places. And so you need to build and like help certain parts of your city become maybe not necessarily denser, but more amenity rich, more accessible to transit, places that are like downtowns. So I can say that if the city is trying to work with developers or other people, that this is the kind of knowledge you need to have, because there's the places that you want if you want to attract more residents. I'll also say, and I don't know what this means fiscally, but that for most downtowns, the residents only really make up 10% or less of just the people who are downtown. It's usually workers and visitors make up a much larger percentage. I'm not sure what that translates into fiscally, but that's what I'm able to speak.
Um, I'm really interested to see how your findings could help city make decisions and solve up. Especially the whole issue during the pandemic, we started to have the streeteries, right? That took up a lot of what had been parking space. And then in some parts of Georgetown, I just live north of here in Glover Park. So there's this whole long stretch of Wisconsin Avenue that was given over to streeteries, places to eat outside. And then I thought that kind of added into the big debate about, well, if we have just parking on one side of the street allowed and the other side of the street now will be bike lanes, a lot of people became very upset, like, oh, we're not going to have parking and I can't, be walking 3 blocks to get to my car. But can you take the streetery data, like what happened with the streeteries taking a good chunk of parking out of the mix, right? And I think it kind of relates too, strangely, to your idea, because people kind of love streeteries, right? Like people are sitting outside. It was like people are houses in the evening, and that seems to attract more people. People want to live in this part of the city. Because there's life on the street, there's activity, there's fun things to do. And to the extent that we were talking about the role of automobiles and all the big highway infrastructure for automobiles and expressways, how that really damaged the quality of life and the desirability of the downtown area. And then the other question I had, and this is for you, Jess, is can you include in your data analysis, not just census data, but real estate data, what things moving, and what are the costs of things? Because I mean, it's just my general sense would be that buying an apartment or renting an apartment downtown Oklahoma City would probably be more doable than getting yourself a really nice apartment downtown. So that also makes me wonder, like the census data, are you breaking that down by age? Are you breaking it down by, professional or educational level? More granular data. But it's really counterintuitive. I thought cities are but idea that people still want to be in the city of downtown area.
Big streeter question. It's funny that you're talking about that. Because I was just reading something where if you ask people on the street, like, what do you notice about this city street? We'll say the buildings, they're the people walking, like the people on the street, like the cars that are driving, but no one ever says, parked cars. And they take up a ton of room. And we just take it as granted that they have like there are like these walls of cars on the other side of the street. And they have a lot of say. And when you announce that you're going to get rid of some of them, it's like this big hullabaloo. But we did it with the streeteries, and surprise, surprise, everything's fine. People can still there's still ways for people to get to restaurants, still find ways to eat. And you forget that a lot of people, especially in cities, are not driving. And there's a lot of kind of value given to people who drive, and we overlook all the people who are biking and walking and taking transit. That's the first thing I'll say. The other thing is, it would be interesting to do an analysis of streets that got stuteries and streets that didn't, and to see what business sales looked like, which you could do with this data probably. So giving me ideas. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for your question and also your challenge on what other kinds of data sets could we be using. And I wish I had taken one of your classes to help me with this. I have definitely not gotten granular enough to pick apart the census data and make analysis out of that yet. And I 100% agree with you that that would be really interesting. This is an ongoing project. And what I'm most excited about to do first is to just to add more cities, to have a bigger sample sizes. And then also because we discovered that smaller downtowns, not smaller cities, but smaller downtowns are the ones that are growing the fastest. I kind of want to look at more mid-sized cities and see what's going on too, because these are all major US cities. And so I want to know what's going on, especially in the middle of the country, now that we know like the South and West, are just booming, because I want to pick some of that out. But yes, it would be super interested to see, and which people are moving to these downtowns. And I'm sure that there's great data. I would love anybody who has suggestions about which data sets I should find through. It would be great because yeah, the 5-year estimates have these pretty big limitations. Yes, Houston and Pittsburgh.
Yeah, I'll make it brief. I could go on and on this. We're top of the hour, but Josiah, I was wondering if you could just share some of your initial thoughts on the quality of the replica data, because that's something that, as I mentioned to you before, that our agency is looking at. Replica and other big data sources potentially to capture information on travel behavior and to validate ground truth data like the data I collected from our regional travel survey.
Yeah, I mean, 2 things. A, the fact that the data showed me what I wanted makes me think that it's accurate. But the other thing is that I know that they what they call ground truth, which is they have the model, they have the GPS data, they scale it up using census data, and then they use that to create a model, right? They like run the synthetic population, they run them around. And then they take household travel surveys like what you collect, and they compare. And I think they use other data sources too, and they basically adjust the model to fit better match what's actually happening based on using other data sources. So I think it's as accurate as it can be. At some point, it's like this weird cycle of data where it's like data feeding into data, and it's just kind of the best we have, unless you're like literally on the ground counting everything on every street.
And just for Jess, yeah, just a quick comment. I mean, looking at census ACS data, and I know you focused on population, residential population, and I think that that's like one dimension certainly of if we're looking at downtowns. But I think your comment on real estate and looking at real estate data, I would echo that. I mean, I think that when I was listening to your presentation, what I was thinking in the back of my mind is like, yes, a lot of people are moving back into downtowns. I agree with that. But then if you look at commercial real estate in downtown, it's a very different picture. So I think, heard you looking at data sources.
Sure. And I guess maybe I should have been more clear in my presentation, but part of the interest in doing this project was because we know so much about how office workers are not coming downtown anymore. And that's such a big part of the conversation and the narrative. And so this project was specifically about like what else is happening too. It's not all just about office workers, especially because maybe not in DC, but in so many places, office workers is not everybody. I was a touring musician before the pandemic. So when people were using this language of no one's going back into the office, it was like, who are they talking about? Like, you know, it's only like what, 20% of the population works in offices. Right. So.
June, do you have any final comments?
Actually, this conversation, Jess, your presentation is so interesting because it's like something I've been thinking about in the context of Washington, DC, like every day. And I wonder what that implies for like the implications of building the right downtowns, if people are still wanting to live in downtowns despite the decreased presence of office workers. Like people still want to be connected to the amenities and the opportunities and the commercial activities. So what does that imply for urban planners and thinking about building post-COVID downtowns in cities? Anyways, food for thought. In general, yeah, I think we were able to go from the Sahel region in Africa all the way back to Washington, DC. Truly global cities-esque summit. So thank you guys all for coming. This is the sixth Georgetown Global Cities Initiatives Research Summit, and we'll keep celebrating student research in urban places around the world. So come again next year. If you're still in school next year, you can apply again. So we'll still be celebrating your interdisciplinary urban research. So thank you all the student presenters. Thank you faculty for staying around and giving responses. And Uva, the floor is yours.
I just want to thank Boone again. Thank you so much for everything that you've done. So here is in all sincerity, here's the shameless plug. I invite everyone to sign up to get the emails from the Global Cities Initiative. All your friends. You know, this is really a socialization project of finding people who are interested in coming together to talk about cities. The conversation is happening all across campus. There's no doubt in my mind that it is. I know it is. Talking to faculty, talking to students. But coming together in a setting like this today, I think is different than what people are experiencing in their individual classes. And I just want to thank everyone for coming and participating in it. It's just incredibly inspiring. And if I kind of look back a couple of years when we were beginning to frame out the value proposition of starting an initiative like this at Georgetown, actually several people, you know, first responded saying, gee, you know, well, that's just not Georgetown's thing. You know, we don't have an architecture school. We don't have an engineering school. We don't have a geography department. So, you know, many people said, well, gee, you know, that's a conversation that happens somewhere else. But in working with faculty and with students, we have definitely proved those folks wrong. We have an opportunity to think in the way in which we would think at Georgetown about this set of subjects, and by doing so, I think we make a really big contribution. I think all of the presentations today really exemplify that. So big thank you to everyone for participating. I think we've got a few more drinks and snacks back there, but thanks everyone. Feel free to hang out and we'll just keep the conversation going.